Stop talking right now. I need you to understand something that nobody wants to admit, but everyone secretly knows. The reason you feel exhausted at the end of most days isn't because you're working too hard. It's because you're explaining too much. You're wasting your life force trying to make people understand what they will never grasp, and simultaneously destroying precious connections by talking when silence would honor them more. Most of you listening right now are committing communication suicide every single day and calling it relationship building. You think you're being clear, but you're actually being foolish. You think you're being thorough, but you're actually being draining. And the worst part is, the people who succeed, the ones who actually build empires and maintain powerful relationships, they know a secret that you're violating every time you open your mouth. They know exactly when to stop speaking. And that knowledge is the difference between those who lead and those who beg for understanding their entire lives. You know what separates those who walk in true power from those who constantly drain themselves trying to be understood? It's not how well they speak, it's knowing when to stop speaking. And I want to tell you something today that will transform the way you interact with every single person in your life. There are exactly 2 situations when you must choose silence. And if you master these 2 moments, you will preserve your energy, protect your vision, and position yourself for the kind of success that doesn't require constant explanation. The first situation is this: when someone cannot understand your feelings through your words. And the second is when someone can understand everything without any words at all. Now, before you think this is simple, let me take you somewhere that will change how you see communication forever. I want you to think about the last time you tried to explain something deeply important to you, something that came from the core of who you are, and the person sitting across from you just stared back with empty eyes. You used different words, you tried analogies, you shared your heart, and still nothing. That frustration you felt wasn't because you lacked vocabulary. It was because you were trying to pour your ocean into their cup. Some vessels simply aren't shaped to hold what you're offering. Let me tell you about a young man named Rashid. Rashid lived in a small town in Morocco, and from the time he was a boy, he saw things differently. While other children played, he watched how water moved through the streets during rain. He observed how the sun hit certain buildings at certain angles. By the time he was 25, Rashid had designed a revolutionary water collection system that could provide clean water to drought-affected villages using nothing but natural condensation and solar energy. This wasn't just an idea. He had built a working prototype in his own backyard. Excited and full of passion, Rashid went to the local council. He brought diagrams, he brought his prototype. He spoke for 30 minutes straight, explaining how this system could change everything for their region. When he finished, the council members looked at each other, then back at him. "But we've always gotten water from the wells," one said. "This seems complicated," said another. "How do we know it will work?" asked a third, despite having just watched Rashid demonstrate the working model right in front of them. Rashid went home that night and did something that changed his trajectory. He returned the next week with more explanations, more diagrams, more passion. He spent an hour this time. He answered every question. He simplified his language. He used stories they could relate to. And you know what happened? They understood even less. Why? Because the problem was never the clarity of his words. The problem was they were not equipped to see what he was showing them. Their minds were not prepared for the solution he was presenting. And the more he explained, the more he convinced them that his idea was too complex, too risky, too different. Here's what Rashid didn't understand yet. You cannot make a person understand what they are not ready to receive. You cannot force comprehension on someone whose mind is already made up. You cannot explain feelings to people who refuse to feel. And this is where most people waste years of their lives. They keep talking. They keep explaining. They keep hoping that if they just find the right words, finally someone will get it. After months of frustration, Rashid made a decision. he stopped explaining. He went back to his backyard and he built. He built a larger system, then another. He documented results. Within 2 years, a team of international engineers visiting the region stumbled upon his work. They didn't need 30 minutes of explanation. They saw it, they understood it immediately. And within 6 months, Rashid's system was being implemented in 12 countries. The council members who couldn't understand, they were still having the same meetings, discussing the same old problems, using the same old solutions. This is your first silence. When you recognize that someone cannot understand your feelings through your words, you must stop speaking. Not because you are giving up, not because you are bitter, but because you are wise enough to know that some conversations are seeds falling on concrete. Nothing will grow there no matter how much you water it with your words. And here's what you need to understand about language itself. Words are bridges, yes, but not every chasm has a bridge that can span it. Some gaps exist not because of distance, but because of dimension. You're speaking from a place of vision. They're hearing from a place of fear. You're communicating from experience. They're filtering through assumption. You're offering transformation. They're protecting comfort. No amount of words can bridge dimensional differences. When you continue to explain yourself to people who have demonstrated they cannot or will not understand, you do 3 things. First, you drain your own energy. Energy you need for building, for creating, for moving forward. Second, you give them ammunition to misunderstand you even further, because now they have more of your words to twist, more of your heart to misinterpret. And third, you insult yourself. Yes, you insult yourself by suggesting that your vision, your feeling, your truth needs the validation of someone who lacks the capacity to hold it. Think about this. King Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, said there is a time for everything, a time to speak and a time to be silent. He didn't say speak until people understand. He said no when silence is the appropriate response. Because wisdom isn't about how much you can say. Wisdom is about knowing when saying more makes you look more foolish. So I'm asking you today, who are you still trying to explain yourself to? What relationship are you exhausting yourself in, hoping that your next conversation will finally be the one where they get it? What vision are you diluting by constantly defending it to people who will never see it? Stop. Choose the first silence. Preserve your power. Protect your purpose. And watch what happens when you redirect that energy toward those who are ready to receive what you're offering. Now, let me take you to the other side of this truth, because this is where most people miss the beauty entirely. There is a second silence, and this one is not about protection. This one is about honor. This silence happens when someone can understand everything without any words. And when you find yourself in the presence of such a person, such a connection, such a relationship, the worst thing you can do is fill the space with unnecessary explanation. You see, there exists a language that transcends vocabulary. There is a communication that happens soul to soul, spirit to spirit, heart to heart. And when you are standing in that kind of connection, words become almost insulting. It's like trying to explain the color of the sunset to someone who is standing right next to you watching the same sky. What are you doing? You're diminishing the experience by trying to capture it in syllables and sentences. Let me take you to ancient Persia. To a time when craftsmanship was considered sacred, there was a master carpet weaver named Farhan, whose carpets were not just floor coverings but works of art that told stories, captured emotions, and held the history of generations in their threads. Farhan had woven for 40 years, and his reputation had spread across empires. Kings and merchants traveled months just to commission a single piece from his hands. But Farhan was getting older, and he knew his knowledge would die with him unless he passed it on. So he took on an apprentice, a young woman named Layla. Now, Layla was different from the dozens of others who had asked to learn from Farhan over the years. Most came wanting to learn the technique, the patterns, the methods they could replicate and sell. But Layla came with something else. She came with the same eyes Farhan had, eyes that saw beyond the thread to the story it could tell. For 3 years, Farhan taught Layla. But here's what was remarkable. After the first few months of basic instruction, Farhan barely spoke. He would sit at his loom, and Layla would sit at hers, and they would weave. Sometimes for entire days without a single word passing between them. Visitors thought this strange. How can she learn if you don't teach? They would ask Farhan. He would smile and say nothing because he knew something they didn't. Real mastery is not transferred through words. It is caught, not taught. One day, a wealthy patron came to commission what he called the most important carpet of his life. He wanted a piece that would represent his entire family legacy, something that would be passed down for generations. He spent 3 hours explaining to Farhan exactly what he wanted. Colors, symbols, patterns, stories, everything. Farhan listened patiently, asked a few questions, and accepted the commission. Weeks into the project. The patron returned to check on the progress. He walked into the workshop and saw Farhan and Layla working on 2 different sections of this massive carpet. The patron watched for a few minutes, then began to speak. He started explaining again what he wanted, worried that perhaps Farhan had forgotten some details. He pointed at certain areas, questioned color choices, expressed concerns about the pattern flow. Farhan stopped weaving and listened. Then he did something unexpected. He remained completely silent and simply gestured to Layla. She didn't ask for clarification. She didn't request that Farhan explain what the patron meant. She just nodded once and adjusted her section. The patron, frustrated by the silence, turned to Layla. Do you understand what I'm asking for? Did he tell you what I explained? Do you know the significance of what this carpet must represent? Layla looked up at him with calm eyes and said, I understand. The patron, unsatisfied, spent another 20 minutes explaining again. When he finally left, he was convinced the carpet would be ruined because clearly these 2 weavers didn't communicate enough. How could they create something magnificent without constant discussion and explanation? 3 months later, when the carpet was completed, the patron returned. When the covering was pulled back and he saw the finished work, he wept. Not polite tears of appreciation, but deep, body-shaking sobs. Because there, in thread and color and pattern, was not just what he had asked for, but what he hadn't even known how to ask for. The carpet captured not just his family's history, but their unspoken pain, their hidden joys, their secret hopes. It was as if Farhan and Layla had reached into his soul and woven what they found there. How did you know? The patron asked through his tears. I never told you about these things. How could you have understood? Farhan looked at Layla, and Layla looked at Farhan, and neither of them spoke. Because how do you explain to someone that when 2 people are operating at the same frequency, communication happens in the silence? How do you tell someone that words would have actually limited what they were able to create? This is the second silence. When you meet someone who understands you without explanation, when you find yourself in a relationship where your glance says more than a speech, when you work with someone who knows your next move before you make it, the respectful thing, the honoring thing, the powerful thing is to let that understanding exist without drowning it in unnecessary words. Because here's what happens when you over-explain to someone who already understands. You insult their intelligence. You question their perception. You reduce something sacred to something ordinary. It's like taking a diamond and explaining that it's valuable. The person holding it already knows. Your explanation doesn't increase its worth. It actually suggests you think they're too simple to recognize value when they see it. Too many people destroy profound connections by talking them to death. They meet someone who gets them, really gets them. And then they spend all their time explaining themselves anyway. Why? Because they've become so used to being misunderstood that they don't know how to exist in understanding. They're so accustomed to defending and clarifying that when they finally find someone who needs no defense and no clarification, they can't stop the habit. Now here's where this becomes practical for your life. Because knowing these 2 silences exist is one thing, but having the discernment to know which silence you're standing in That's where your power activates. Most people fail not because they don't understand the principle. They fail because they can't tell the difference between someone who cannot understand and someone who already understands. And that confusion costs them everything. You need to develop the ability to read the moment, to sense the capacity of the person standing before you, to recognize whether you're dealing with concrete or fertile soil. And I'm going to tell you how to know, because this isn't mystical, it's practical. There are signs, there are indicators, and when you train yourself to see them, you'll stop wasting your breath and start maximizing your impact. Let me tell you about Kenzo. Kenzo was an architect in Tokyo who had developed a revolutionary approach to sustainable housing. His designs could reduce energy consumption by 70% while actually costing less to build than traditional structures. He had spent 5 years perfecting this system, and now he was ready to present it to the world. He had 2 critical meetings scheduled in the same week. The first meeting was with the board of directors of a traditional construction company. These were men who had built their empire on conventional methods, who had 50 years of doing things a certain way. Kenzo walked into that boardroom with his presentation, his models, his data. He began to explain his vision. Within 5 minutes, he noticed something. Their eyes had glazed over. They were nodding, but not with understanding, with politeness. They kept interrupting with questions that showed they weren't following his explanation. They were looking for problems, but this changes everything we know, one said. As if that was a reason to reject it rather than embrace it. Our contractors won't understand this, another stated, revealing that their concern was comfort, not effectiveness. This seems risky, a third added, despite the data showing it was actually safer. Kenzo felt the familiar urge rising in him, the urge to explain more, to convince harder, to break through their resistance with better words. But then he remembered something his mentor had once told him. When someone is looking for reasons to say no, your job is not to give them more words to twist into additional reasons. So right there, in that boardroom, Kenzo made a choice. He finished his presentation calmly, answered their questions briefly, and when they said they needed time to think about it, he smiled, thanked them, and left. He didn't push. He didn't beg. He didn't over-explain. He recognized the first silence. They could not understand his vision through his words because they didn't want to leave their comfort. 3 days later, Kenzo had his second meeting. This one was with his mentor, an older architect named Hiroshi, who had been designing sustainable structures for decades. Kenzo walked into Hiroshi's office, and before he could even open his folder, Hiroshi looked at the model Kenzo was carrying and said, "You've solved it." Kenzo felt that familiar urge again, the urge to explain everything, to walk Hiroshi through every detail, to justify every design choice. But then he saw something in Hiroshi's eyes, complete understanding, total comprehension. Hiroshi picked up the model, turned it slowly, nodded several times, and then looked at Kenzo with what can only be described as recognition, one master seeing another. Kenzo opened his mouth to begin his presentation, and Hirotoshi raised his hand gently. "I see what you've done. I see how you've integrated the solar absorption with the structural integrity. I see how you've turned the ventilation system into the support system. I see it." And in that moment, Kenzo made his second choice. He closed his folder. He didn't launch into explanation. He didn't detail his process. He simply nodded back. Because what would his words have added to that moment? Nothing. They would have actually diminished it. 2 meetings, 2 different responses, 2 different silences. Same man, same vision. But Kenzo had developed the discernment to know which silence each situation required. And here's what happened. That traditional construction company called him back 6 months later, wanting to revisit his proposal. Why? Because his silence had given his workroom to speak for itself. When they saw his designs being implemented elsewhere, when they watched competitors adopt his methods. His earlier silence made them respect his vision instead of remembering his desperation. And Hiroshi? He became not just Kenzo's mentor, but his partner. They worked together for the next 15 years. often spending entire days in each other's presence with minimal conversation, building structures that changed skylines across 3 continents. Their understanding required no words, because it operated at a level words couldn't reach. So how do you know which silence you're in? Listen to this carefully. When someone cannot understand your feelings through words, they will keep asking you to explain what you've already explained. They will question what you've already answered. They will misinterpret what you've already clarified. It's not that they didn't hear you, it's that they cannot receive you. Their questions are not seeking understanding, they're defending position. Their confusion is not requesting light, it's protecting darkness. But when someone understands without words, you'll know because they'll complete your sentences. They'll nod before you finish your point. They'll act on your vision without needing a manual. Their questions won't be about what, they'll be about when and how can I help. You won't feel drained after talking to them, you'll feel energized. You won't leave the conversation wondering if you explained it right. You'll leave knowing you were fully received. The key is this: stop trying to turn concrete into soil and stop insulting soil by treating it like it needs to be convinced to grow seeds. Know what you're working with. Honor it with the appropriate silence. And watch how much of your life energy you reclaim when you stop pouring yourself out in the wrong places and stop over-explaining yourself in the right ones. Now I want to bring this home to where you live every single day, because understanding these 2 silences intellectually means nothing if you don't activate them practically. Your life is about to change when you start operating as a person who knows when to speak and when to hold your peace. This isn't about becoming quiet. This is about becoming powerful. And power knows when to release words and when to withhold them. See, most people live their entire lives exhausted because they think they owe everyone an explanation. They think that if someone doesn't understand them, it's their fault for not communicating clearly enough. So they spend decades explaining themselves to their parents who will never understand their choices, defending their dreams to friends who will never share their vision, justifying their decisions to people whose opinion has no bearing on their destiny. And year after year, they wonder why they feel so drained, why they have no energy left for the actual building of what they're called to create. Let me tell you something that will liberate you right now. You do not owe everyone access to your inner world. You do not have to make everyone understand you. You do not need universal approval to move forward with your life. And when you try to achieve it, when you exhaust yourself attempting to bring everyone along on your journey, you're not being kind. You're being foolish. You're pouring your oil on the ground instead of keeping it for your lamp. When you choose the first silence, when you stop explaining yourself to people who have proven they cannot understand your feelings through your words, something powerful happens. You reclaim your energy. You protect your vision from sabotage. Because every time you explain your dream to someone who doesn't have the capacity to see it, you give them the opportunity to plant doubt. Every time you share your feelings with someone who cannot hold them with care, you give them ammunition to wound you. Every time you defend your path to someone who is committed to misunderstanding you, you give them power over your peace. And here's what you need to understand about vision. Vision is fragile in its early stages. It's like a flame in the wind. One strong breath of doubt from the wrong person can extinguish it. This is why you must guard what you're building. This is why silence with those who cannot understand is not cruelty, it's wisdom. You're not shutting them out. You're shutting out their capacity to destroy what's trying to grow in you. Let me tell you about Amara. Amara lived in a small village in Kenya where girls were not encouraged to pursue education beyond primary school. But Amara had a vision. She saw a school where young girls could learn not just academics, but leadership, technology, sustainable farming, business skills. She saw them becoming the transformation their communities desperately needed. At 23 years old, with almost no money and no formal training in education, Amara decided to build this school when she first shared her vision? The responses split into two categories. The skeptics said things like, who do you think you are? You're too young, you have no degree, you have no money. This village has never had anything like this. Why would anyone support you? And then there were the believers. Her grandmother, who couldn't read or write herself, who simply looked at Amara and said, I know who you are, build it. An old teacher named Abbasi, who had taught Amara years ago, who heard her vision and simply asked, when do we start? Now, Amara could have spent her energy trying to convince the skeptics. She could have created presentation after presentation, explained her plan over and over, defended her qualifications endlessly. Many people in her position would have. They would have thought, if I can just make them understand, if I can just get everyone on board, then I can move forward. But Amara understood something crucial. She understood the first silence. She stopped explaining herself to the skeptics. She didn't argue, she didn't defend, she didn't try to prove she was capable. She simply let them talk while she built. She took the energy she would have spent convincing them and poured it into action. She found one small room. She started with 5 girls. She taught them in the mornings before she went to her regular job. She didn't announce it. She didn't promote it. She just built. And with her grandmother and Abbasi. She practiced the second silence when her grandmother would come by and see the progress. Amara didn't need to explain why she had arranged the classroom a certain way or why she had chosen to teach certain subjects. Her grandmother would just nod, sometimes touch Amara's face, and walk away. That nod said everything. When Abbasi would show up to help, they could work for hours with minimal conversation. He understood her vision so completely that he could anticipate what was needed before she asked. 5 years later, Amara's school had 3 buildings and educated 200 girls. International organizations were funding her programs. Government officials who had initially dismissed her were now asking to partner with her. And those skeptics, some of them came around, asking how they could get involved. Others remained skeptical, still finding reasons to doubt. And here's the beautiful part. Amara's response to both groups was the same peaceful silence. She didn't say, I told you so, to those who doubted. She didn't need their validation anymore. And she didn't over-explain to those who wanted to join. Those who truly understood were welcomed. Those who couldn't were left to their opinions. This is what it looks like to live as a person of powerful silence. You become someone who is not controlled by the need to be understood by everyone. You become secure enough in your purpose that other people's confusion doesn't shake you. You become wise enough to recognize who deserves your words and who deserves your silence. So, I'm going to leave you with this challenge. This week, identify one person in your life who has demonstrated repeatedly that they cannot understand your feelings through your words. Maybe it's a family member who questions every decision you make. Maybe it's a friend who always finds problems with your plans. Maybe it's a colleague who dismisses your ideas. Choose the first silence with them. Stop explaining. Stop defending. Stop trying to make them see what they're not equipped to see. And then identify one person who understands you without needing explanation. Maybe it's someone you've been over-talking to out of habit. Maybe it's someone whose understanding you've been insulting with unnecessary words. Honor them with the second silence. Let your connection exist in that powerful space where souls speak to souls. Because at the end of your life, you won't regret the explanations you didn't give to people who wouldn't have understood anyway. But you will regret the energy you wasted trying to convince them. You will regret the visions you diluted, the dreams you defended to death, the power you gave away to people who had no capacity to hold it. Be silent in these two situations and watch how your life transforms. When you stop speaking to walls and stop explaining to those who already see, this is not about being quiet, this is about being wise. And wisdom always knows when to speak and when to let silence do the talking.